On December 14th, 2014, a teenage boy is exploring the woods around the back roads of Beaver County, Pennsylvania, around 30 feet from the nearest path. It is a quiet, rarely traveled area where the nearest road, is just under a mile away. One that cuts through a residential area that hosts only a dozen or so homes, with very minimal traffic. A little more than a locally known shortcut, and from Route 989. The young lad is in a world of his own, enjoying the peace and tranquility of nature, completely unaware of what he is about to stumble across. He only spots what he is about to discover because it looks so extremely out of place. Even among the death and decay of the Pennsylvania winter, the thing has a distinct air of morbidity about it. When he recognizes what it is, he turns on his heels and runs, screaming, from the woods. Tears in his eyes, his heart racing in his chest, because what he had discovered that gray December day was a severed head. Only this wasn't the disembodied head of a newly murdered person. This particular head had been embalmed, preserved. When police finally arrived, hours later, they discovered that the eyes of the severed head were shut, but the mouth was wide open. They intensively searched the entire surrounding area for any signs of the body it had once been attached to, but found nothing. The head was so well preserved that its face was still definitely recognizable, but a subsequent facial reconstruction yielded no clues to the owner's identity. Forensic examiners estimated that it had been there for between 1 week and a month, just lying there among the fallen leaves, waiting to be discovered. If the gray hairs that covered her scalp were anything to go by, it was thought that the owner of the severed head was anything from 50 to 80 years of age. An anatomy professor turned forensic artist by the name of Michelle Vitale examined the head in excruciating detail by request of the local police department. After hours upon hours of studying, she came to a shocking conclusion. Whoever had severed the head had done so with the skill of an expert pathologist, that they must have had some kind of anatomical training to have completed the task with such incredible precision. A conclusion shockingly reminiscent of the world-famous 19th century serial killer, Jack the Ripper. When we lifted the skin flap at the nape of the neck, we could see that the whole purpose of that was to access the key joint that would preserve both the head and the vertebral column, she told local news reporter during an interview. This is not anybody going with a kitchen knife or anything remotely like that. It was well done, and it was placed perfectly. She was dismembered professionally. Another piece of evidence that supported the theory that whoever had severed the head had done so with professional skill was the use of what are known as eye caps, a common mortician's tool. And these are devices that resemble contact lenses and are worn in a chillingly similar way. They slip between the eyeball and the eyelid of the deceased person and are complete with small ridges of spikes that maim the natural curvature of the eye, whilst holding the eyelid shut. The pathologist who examined the embalmed head removed these eye caps and found that the person's eyeballs had been removed, but also made a disturbing discovery. The eyeballs had been replaced with small, red, rubber, bouncy balls. the same kind a child might play with. Whoever had done such a thing obviously had a sick sense of humor and was undoubtedly a very dangerously disturbed individual. After the initial forensic analysis, the embalmed head was sent over to Salt Lake City-based IsoForensics, who undertook isotope testing on it. For those unfamiliar with the technique, isotopes are particles that can be found in the human body that come from drinking water and can be traced back to a particular geographical location. When the results of the isotope testing came back, investigators were able to conclude that the woman had spent the previous several months being something of a nomad, having lived, or at least stayed in areas including West Virginia, Western Maryland, Southern Pennsylvania, and even as far as Eastern Ohio and New York State. Yet, despite there being evidence to the owner of the severed head having lived in so many places, there was little to show that she had ever lived in Beaver County during time leading up to her death or being discovered. However, the use of embalming fluid meant that determining the exact time of death was almost impossible. It also made DNA matching next to impossible, as the fluid destroyed nucleotide bonds that enabled such analysis to be undertaken. The small amount that was obtained was so damaged that it could not be matched to any other samples in the entire national database. But, much to the relief of those involved with the analysis, it was discovered that there was no criminal element to her death, but that cardiac arrest was the most likely explanation for her demise. This was due to toxicology tests that had shown that there were trace amounts of lidocaine and atropine in her system, which are both varieties of medication that are used to treat irregular heart issues, most likely a cardiac arrest, but not completely confirmed. One homicide detective was said to have been extremely skeptical that the owner of the embalmed head had died of natural causes, having seen far too many cases in which the possessiveness of the killer was displayed in their willingness to tamper and toy with the body of their quarry. When interviewed by journalists, Beaver County Coroner Terry Totlovic said, "Could it have been somebody with a great deal of anatomical knowledge? Yes. Could it have been somebody who was just peculiar or bizarre? The answer to that question is also yes. We just don't know at this point." Michael O'Brien, the borough police chief, claimed the embalmed head was found so far off the road that it was entirely possible that it could have been simply thrown from a passing car. It was also determined that the scent and flavor of the embalming fluid would have made the flesh very unappealing to scavenger animals, so there was little change it had been dropped by some hungry fox. The placement was deliberate. Someone had wanted it to be found, sooner or later. A number of funeral homes that associated with the Pennsylvania Funeral Directors Association were contacted with pleas for information, and details of the bizarre case were even shared at a National Funeral Directors Association conference. But, unsurprisingly, nobody could shed any light of the gruesome situation. Pretty every theory, with the exception of grave robbery, has been dismissed, with many agreeing that most likely explanation is that the owner of the embalmed head had been a victim of the black market trade that deals in the illegal acquisition of human remains, either for professional or recreational purposes. There's a black market on body parts, and that market is pretty extensive, Beaver County District Attorney Anthony was reported to have said. Detectives have repeatedly stated that they believe the head may have been removed from the corpse of natural causes death by what's known as a body broker, an individual or firm who purchases and sells cadavers or remains. One solid reason that this line of investigation is thought to be the most plausible is because the black market cadaver industry had been linked to similar abuses in the past. Due to a plethora of firms where you can purchase human remains, any attempt to discover where severed head came from, according to Professor Michel Vitali, extremely hard to track. If the owner of the severed head is to ever be identified, it would almost certainly require the assistance of a dentist. The forensic investigation discovered that the owner of the severed head had done work on every single tooth, one of them as many as 7 times. On one of 3 teeth that had been pulled, forensic dentists discovered a filling compound that wasn't available to dentists before 2004, indicating well that the woman must have died after that particular year. So far, analysis of the woman's dental work has produced no leads, but with the forensic facial reconstruction, investigators still hope that someone, someday, will be able to identify the woman and give her name back. Almost 6 years later, we are still no closer to discovering the identity of whoever owned the embalmed head, or that of the sick individual who had severed or stolen it before replacing the eyeballs with red rubber balls. It might well remain a total mystery who exactly placed the head in the woods out in Pennsylvania. But perhaps the real question is, do we really want to know the whole story behind it? Or are we more likely to sleep easier, remaining in blissful ignorance?